Here at T-Rex Arms, we like to talk about the citizens' defense industry, particularly as an alternative to a purely state-run military-industrial complex thing. If there's not overlap, then you'll end up with two very distinct tracks: professional warfighter stuff over here, and then consumer stuff over here. But sometimes they do get really close together, and there is some big news regarding that this week. It's very exciting stuff. But in order to explain why it's exciting, first I have to tell you a story. In the 70s and 80s, there was an explosion of new technology in the heads-up display and helmet-mounted display arenas. There were products like the Kaiser Electronics Agile Eye or the Elbit Dash. This is like classic stuff. But the only real application for this technology was military pilots, and they used this tech to get increased information in their eyes and head tracking for their weapons. It wasn't until a lot later that the infantry side got some of these capabilities as well. Most recently, there have been some devices like smarter E-Cody clip-ons, the Lit Eye or Light Eye or Arc 4, things that either clip onto night vision devices or have a little transparent universal soldier kind of eyepiece. But then over on the private sector side, there have also always been head-mounted displays that get made by technology and research companies, but it's much harder to sell them if they don't have as vital a use case as the targeting solution for an attack helicopter, for example. It wasn't until the 1990s that the cost came down enough that these consumer devices were cheap enough that they could actually get bought, and mostly for entertainment. Virtual reality tried to be the next big thing in video games, but the computers and consoles of the time did not really have the processing power for what I would call photorealistic immersive video games.
Virtual Boy, a 3D game for a 3D world.
But that was 30 years ago. For the next 20 years or so, computing power and game technology and real-time engines got way better. And then, about 10 years ago, virtual reality had a massive resurgence, powered almost entirely by the Oculus Rift, a new headset that completely changed the game.
My name is Palmer Luckey, and I'm a virtual reality enthusiast and the designer of the Rift.
Suddenly, the consumer technology was way ahead of the military's niche products. Every big tech company jumped on this bandwagon, or tried to. Eventually, even Apple built a fancy VR headset. Microsoft took a slightly different tact. They built an augmented reality headset called HoloLens. Ryan, who is behind the camera right now, actually worked on the launch of that first product, and it was very cool, but very expensive, and it didn't really have that much useful software, and so as a result, it didn't really have very many buyers, except for the US Army. The IVAS project was built around the HoloLens 2, which stands for Integrated Visual Augmentation System. Now, technically, according to the military, this is not really augmented reality because they take augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, and they put them into one bucket called extended reality, which they spell XR. But IVAS was a very cool spatial awareness tool with multiple night vision cameras and thermal fusion and extra sensors, and the project has been running for a few years now, and it's created hardware that is big, heavy, power hungry, runs thermally quite hot, and I would say it is not universally loved. But this Tuesday, Anduril announced that they are taking over the IVAS project. Now, Anduril, if you don't know who they are a newer, I would say free market style, very fast, very agile, fairly young defense contracting company. They still only sell to the military, but they compete with the primes, the main military contractors, as if they were a private tech company rather than an entrenched extension of the Pentagon. They have some fantastic drone technology, and more importantly, a great spatial awareness and command and control software layer called Lattice, which they recently open sourced. And the founder of Anduril is Palmer Luckey, the same guy that built the original Oculus Rift.
We don't have time for business as usual. The types of threats that the United States is facing, that our allies around the world are facing.
So now you see why this is really interesting. This Anduril IVAS news does not happen in a vacuum. It's kind of extra interesting because over the last year or so, there have been an explosion of consumer wearables that go on your face, not always on your eyes. But CES this year was full of new tech that does head-mounted displays. And my favorite device this year for putting data into my eyeballs is the Evan Reality's G1 smart glasses. In many ways, these are very much my style. They have very cool little micro LED screens in the sides here, and then those project onto waveguides that are sandwiched beautifully in between two very thin lenses right here. So the whole package is incredibly light, incredibly slim, very well executed, and the screens look great. It even animates on and off in a cool way. Now it is a monochrome display, and it's a pretty small window that you actually end up looking like. Think of it more like a dashboard gauge as opposed to a full workspace replacement. And then there are little microphones here that are well positioned to pick up my voice and not bad for picking up other conversations. This is, I believe, the ambient light sensor so that it can adapt to the environment where I am. There's also a clip-on sunglass thingamajig that you can put on there, and that makes it usable in daylight. And then because we have the batteries at the back here, the whole thing ends up very well balanced and comfortable. And these are proper glasses frames, by the way. An optometrist or ophthalmologist, please argue amongst yourselves in the comments which is better. They can adjust these frames using their adjustable frame things. The nose pads, everything adjusts properly like actual glasses, and they kind of look like actual glasses. But you still, even with these tiny batteries, get more than a day of battery life. And one of the things that's kind of interesting is you have little projectors on each side, you have little screens in each eye, but they are in fact independent. Each one has its own radio getting information from the app. So yeah, some kind of clever minimalism going on with these particular glasses. And then they recharge wirelessly inside of the nice little case here. So yeah, the whole package, I would say, from a hardware perspective, I'd give it a 10 out of 10. Or actually, maybe now that I think about it, 9 out of 10, because the controls on the battery pods here are touch pads, not clicky buttons. So I would prefer some kind of tactile feedback from the glasses, and we don't really have that. That being said, in the last few weeks that I have been messing around with these things, I've gotten a firmware update and a couple of app updates, so it is relatively nicely supported. However, in many ways, these things are not my style. These are $600 glasses, which have been made for the kind of people who already buy $600 glasses, which I think is a really good idea from a product perspective. It kind of reminds me of the first Tesla product, the Roadster. Obviously, their first car was going to be pretty expensive, so it was clever for them to pick a kind of car that is expected to be expensive and lets them kind of lean into some of the strengths of high torque electrical motors. And this is kind of similar. It's made for a specific demographic from a product perspective, dialed into sophisticated, stylish people, which is, well, it's not me. And the tools inside of the app are for, you know, the stylish people. You have navigation for walking or cycling, very good, as you go through your fashionable city to get a croissant. And it also has real-time translation, very helpful because you would, of course, be in Paris to get your croissant, and you would need Arabic translation available in the app. And then another cool feature that it has is a teleprompter for giving speeches, because of course you would be in Paris to give a TED Talk. So all of these things actually work pretty well, and the app is solidly baked. The hardware design is quite good. The marketing of their website, everything looks really nice and tight and on brand, but it's not so useful for me. I love the hardware. It's possibly just because I love either old, esoteric, or very advanced display technology, and this technically is both. The screen reminds me of the monochromatic CRT displays that were in those first HMDs, the Agile Eye and so on. And they just look good. I really enjoy reading text and seeing the little green text pop up, but they don't do much work for me. And the good news is that they just don't do much work for me yet, because I would have to say these are not actually very smart glasses. They're actually incredibly dumb glasses because they're just screens. They're almost entirely reliant on the information sent to them by the app. Usually this is a pet peeve of mine, most smart devices being dumb. Google smartwatches, for example, they're not that smart. They're barely smart enough to be a watch. Wear OS is mostly a remote terminal for Google Play services and the larger Google ecosystem. Apple Watches, kind of the same. Garmin watches are a little bit different. They're smart enough that they can do a lot without connecting to the internet or the cloud. If you give them their GPS location, they can calculate sunrise and sunset, track medical data, do a bunch of stuff just on the watch, which is kind of interesting. But in this case, I actually prefer a dumber device that is more reliant upon the software of the app, because it means that we can put different information on these screens. In many ways, I kind of am thinking about the displays in these glasses like smartwatches. They are a very small screen area that displays a very small amount of data, and they just need a little bit more sensors maybe to kind of do some of that stuff. But in this case, I actually appreciate that these are more like dumb terminals for the app. That's great because we have this very polished hardware in a very early stage of development from a very young company. And since a lot of it's being done on the phone, that means a whole bunch of stuff can be easily added through really simple software developments or experiments. They can be nimble and respond very quickly to user requests for different widgets and tools. One request I have, since the screens are controlled independently, I would like to see a little bit of stereoscopic stuff, just for fun. You want to see what I have in mind? You can cross your eyes and see this little mock-up here. And if I can make a 3D map visualization just for this YouTube video, surely Evan Realities can make one for their fancy glasses. Again, just for fun. Now, that being said, navigation is the most buggy of all the apps that they have. It's the only way that I've consistently gotten the left and right eyes to be out of sync. That may be the reason that they have limited to walking and cycling directions, and when I drive, maybe that's when it can't handle the faster refresh speeds. But the dashboard could have some 3D effects, some fake parallax like the Virtual Boy. But my real request is that the Evan Realities app should be opened up a little, maybe with an API, maybe with some kind of plugin architecture. I'd love to see other people develop widgets that can go into the dashboard or other tools that can display stuff. Even if I could just cast a small part of my phone screen to the glasses, I could tinker with this. I could do some more experiments. It's not going to be good for watching video, but maybe if I just scrolled through the OneNote page that has all my notes for this episode, that would be a better way for me to work than to paste everything into the teleprompter app. I again, really love how this thing works, the screens and the optics. I just wish that it was more useful for work. The translation seems like it works well. I just don't need it that often. And the teleprompter is okay. At the end of this video, I'll post a clip using the teleprompter itself, and you can see how well it works. But what I want this for is more day-to-day spatial awareness stuff. And there are some limitations to the hardware. Version 2 of this device could have, like I said, clickier buttons, maybe a couple of more sensors. Even if I just had like a clock, a timer, and a thermometer, maybe a compass in the corner, that would be a great thing to have permanently. And since this is already fairly pricey, I kind of want to see one that is a single-eyed display. That would leave this whole side of the glasses free for either bigger battery, but it doesn't really seem like it needs it. So maybe bone conduction Bluetooth audio over here. I think that would be pretty handy. And then the accelerometer is used to display different things as I look up to activate the dashboard, etc. I kind of want 3 zones. I'd love to be able to look down and see in one eye dope cards, possibly. And then when I look up, see maps. Now remember though that this is just a heads-up display. It is not augmented reality. It doesn't have the tracking capability that I would need to see geospatial pins in three-dimensional space. In the Opsin video, I built a mock-up of an augmented reality interface, which was pretty functional for a mock-up. But you need to have really solid tracking in place to really run that. And ultimately, you would need better screens than these small dashboards here. There is some value in the small screens though, I think. The main thing is they are cheaper. They are way lighter. They can be more rugged, even though I think that the frames themselves might be the weak point here. But the screens run with way, way less power than a lot of their competitors do, and they run cooler. And smaller screens mean less data, which can mean it's less distracting. There's less occlusion of the other stuff that I need to pay attention to. So I want to be experimenting with these limited displays. There's a lot of stuff that I would like to try. A few years ago, there were some interesting speed reading apps that displayed words one at a time. And I'm going to put some of those up in the corner here. You probably have to go back and watch them again with the audio muted. But this kind of stuff here works in tiny screens. It's sort of like burst communication for your brain. I want to tinker with some of that stuff, and in order to do that, Evan needs to give me some more tools. But opening up their architecture, I think, is good, not just for me, but because they need to stand out in the market as more than just the stylish glasses. Like I said, there's been an explosion of different smart glasses on the market right now. Meta Ray-Bans, they skip the screen, they just use speakers and a camera. Halliday has a micro LED screen embedded in the frame. It's very similar to this, but cheaper and a little more finicky. The Vuzix, they have a bunch of different models, but their newest one, display glasses solution with full Android installed on the gigantic frames that you wear, so that's technically more smart. And then there are continued developments in those more serious VR devices. The VR trend is obviously not toward minimalistic screens, but bigger screens, wider field of view, more resolution. And if you're going for an immersive entertainment experience, you need that. And then in augmented reality, if you're going to be displaying images from thermal cameras and other sensors, you're going to need some better screens too, like the Apple Vision Pro had and like the Microsoft HoloLens had. And I say had because both of those products are dead. They just cost too much and they offered too little. There just wasn't enough that you could do with them. My favorite use case for the Apple Vision is this guy who used it to visualize how to run Ethernet cables inside of a house, between stories, between studs. Very fascinating edge case. But it is a perfect example of why we need more open platforms so people can develop their own uses for these kinds of things. So the developers know what the actual real life use cases will be. Which kind of brings us back to where we started this video. All of the consumer head-mounted displays of the past, from the 1980s until now, have struggled to find their killer app, the reason for people to pay for a very expensive gadget. The killer app has always been, in both the military and civilian tracks, killing. Actual combat stuff or simulated combat stuff in games. With this kind of technology, there have always been these two very distinct tracks of requested military applications seeking the most advanced hardware solutions. And then over here, the speculative consumer hardware developers who are seeking profitable private markets. And at this particular time, inside of the IVAS project, which is now under the guidance of Palmer Luckey, they've never been so close together. And from a citizen defense perspective, the killer apps have never been closer together. As gun culture has developed and regular citizens have wanted to own arms and armor and night vision to get more proficient in the disciplines of their use, there is an increasing desire to have some of the same tools for moving, shooting, and communicating in our optics and displays. Increased lethality and effectiveness are the killer apps that the citizen defense industry is interested in, which means that we will be talking about these tools a lot more here at T-Rex Labs. The original machine had a base plate of prefabulated alumite surmounted by a malleable logarithmic casing in such a way that the two main spurving bearings were in direct line with the parametric fan. The latter consisted of 6 hydroscopic Marvel vanes so fitted to the ambulation lunar wane shaft that side fumbling was effectively eliminated. The main winding was of the enormous Lotus O Delta type, placed in every bovoid slots of the stator. If I don't hold my head still, it's actually hard to read this, but we're going to continue on. The turbo encabulator has now reached a high level of success and development, and it is being used in the operation of Nova trunnions. Moreover, whenever a fluorescent score motion is required, it may also be employed in conjunction with a drawn reciprocating dingle arm to reduce sinusoidal repleneration. Yeah, it's difficult to track between here and here. It'd be a lot better if I were talking about something further away. But yeah, it does a relatively good job of listening to me, matching it to the teleprompter, and scrolling it automatically. The hard part is I'm seeing the screen about 6 feet away, and I'm holding this about a foot away. So yeah, needs some practice, but definitely haven't memorized that thing.